Hello and welcome to First Kick Seahawks, the show where we prepare you for the first kick of every play by game day. I am Camden McLaren. Welcome to the show. Today we were going to talk about how it's like an echo. The Seahawks offensive line sucks. Thank you so much for being here. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you would like to support the channel. There is, of course, a link to buy me a coffee in the description below. Every single channel on YouTube does that. Every TikTok, every Instagram, every source of media out there does that. And of course, I am constantly working on the channel to try to grow it, to try to adapt it to the ever-changing media landscape. And as you may have noticed, I made a slight little alteration to the opening. I'm trying to make it a little quicker, so let's go. Anyways, so as some of you may know, Stone Forsythe, the Seahawks' third-string right tackle, who has allowed 35 pressures this year on rushing pass rushers going towards our quarterback, which is a league high, by the way. He's going to be out, which is a good thing and a bad thing. It depends on how you think about it. If you think that the worst offensive lineman when it comes to blocking the pass rusher and protecting the passer is out, that should be considered a good thing. We got a 6th-round pick, Michael Jarrell, who was competing with him for snaps in preseason games. Stone Forsythe would be at left tackle, Michael Jarrell would be at right tackle, and then when Michael Jarrell was not in, Stone Forsythe would be at right tackle. Stone Forsythe, of course, ended up winning that job. Surprise, surprise, that frog Curtis would sometimes be taking snaps at right tackle as well. Well, if you think that the worst right tackle in the league being out is a bad thing, that means that you have no faith whatsoever, I have aphasia sometimes, whatsoever, in Michael Jarrell. That's what happened there. Ever and Jarrell, I merged them together. Then we might be in trouble. As if you watched my Falcons breakdown video the other day, which I know not a lot of you did because YouTube impressions for that video were in the fucking toilet. There we go. YouTube algorithm definitely didn't like that swear word. You would know that I talked about how Derek Hall, who has 5 sacks, has exactly as many sacks on the year as the entire Atlanta Falcons team. They are not getting to the quarterback. So if you are worried that Jimmy Lake, former Huskies head coach, is a good defensive coordinator for this Atlanta Falcons team, I would say do not be worried. One of the big caveats, though, being that our right tackle situation has been bad. Us as an offensive line group has been bad, which means that on the other side of the continent, the Atlanta Falcons are like, this could be our chance. We might be able to actually apply pressure this year. Now, Geno Smith, to his credit, has been very good at avoiding sacks. Now, he's been turning over the ball left and right, which means that a team like the Atlanta Falcons, which has been getting lots of turnovers, lots of them as interceptions and fumbles, and we've been having an interception problem, in particular, fumble problems on special teams. He might have another turnover game. He might turn over the ball twice. But at least once I would expect. If he does not, then bravo, he turned over a new leaf, but through 6 games, he's averaging a turnover a week. But he's not getting sacked a lot. Part of the reason why he's getting so many turnovers is A, he's trying to do too much. B, he has so much pressure immediately in his face, being a quarterback who has pressure in his face faster than anyone else in the league, that he's probably not reading things as patiently and as clear-headed as somebody like a Brock Purdy, as somebody like a Kirk Cousins, who has a top 6 offensive line in the league. If you're a Pro Football Focus fan, which I am not, but I'm trying to speak to the crowds. So I would recommend that you maybe pump the brakes a bit by saying that the Atlanta Falcons pass rush is bad when we know that our offensive line is probably worse than whatever bad type of acting we might think that this Atlanta Falcons pass rush could be. If you remember back in the day under Tom Cable, we would make a bad defense look amazing. Russell Wilson would be back there doing loop-de-loops, not because he was doing them to be special, although I think he eventually did just get used to it, but because that was the only play we had. We would be going up against a ranked 30th defense, and they would be looking like the Legion of Boom out there. Why? Because our offensive line could not block. Now, granted, those guys were communicating worse than our current unit. You think this unit looks bad, which it does on paper. That unit looked completely out of sorts. And part of that was because of our quarterback. Our quarterback could not throw on time. He never learned to throw out on time, which the Broncos have learned, which he's probably going to show Mike Tomlin and company on Sunday. I think the Steelers play Sunday night. But Tom Cable's line shredded, right? It didn't matter. And this is the major point, is that what type of offensive line do you expect a John Schneider team to put together? Originally, Pete Carroll wanted Alex Gibbs, the guy who invented the zone blocking scheme and brought it to, I believe it was the Denver Broncos, maybe it was the 49ers, maybe it was a little bit of both. Definitely Denver Broncos. Alex Gibbs eventually did go to what is now named the Commanders. Zone blocking scheme. That's what Pete Carroll wanted. He wanted a Hall of Fame coach because he knows how important language is. Alex Gibbs did not want anything to do with the Seahawks and their rebuild. But he's like, hey, I know this guy, Tom Cable, and Tom Cable can speak my language. So Pete Carroll said, sure. Even though Tom Cable was a failed Raiders head coach who left with his tail between his legs because of domestic violence issues. 99% sure it was domestic violence issues. So we bring in Tom Cable, and John Schneider, being a good general manager, wants to find players that represent his coaches. And if you remember, Tom Cable was made an assistant head coach. He'll do the offense. Pete Carroll, he's going to focus on the defense. And what was one of the major things, I'm sure all of you remember, Tom Cable's thing was they don't even coach offensive line play in college. I would rather have a player that doesn't know how to play than one that does, because somebody that doesn't know how to play doesn't have bad behaviors. I'll just teach him from scratch. Give me somebody who's super athletic, beefcake, with a bad mentality, a big bad, I'm going to sock you in the face type of player. I'll work with that. Even though we had a Max Unger. Even though we got Russell Okung, who was labeled as the most sure pick in the draft, like a Charles Cross. But what was the Tom Cable pick? James Carpenter. Big, meatsicle guard. Jermaine Ifedi later down the road. Big, meatsicle guard. He can push really hard. He's going to shove you down. He's got a mean streak. We're going to put him at right tackle. He would routinely get just big guys. He liked wrestlers. He wants a long arm because that guy's going to be longer than the arm in front of him. And then he wants to teach him how to throw their body at the thighs of the defensive player in front of him. Chop block him down. He wanted a Justin Britt because that guy was a all-state whatever wrestler, had never been defeated in college or something like that. Played him at guard, played him at tackle, made him a center. That dude had more collective starts than any other player on the offensive line combined because I can just coach them all up. Got Christian Sicoli, who was a defensive tackle, convinced him to be a center because he was the most athletic center that ever would have existed. Didn't let him have any snaps. Started Drew Nowak, who also was a defensive tackle, but was one of the least athletic centers to ever play the game. Started Drew Nowak. Why? Why did we keep this coach for so long? Was it a Pete Carroll thing? Was he a Pete Carroll guy? No, it was an Alex Gibbs decision. Hey, I know this guy, Tom Cable. So I could never decide. Was it John Schneider who convinced Pete Carroll to bring him in? Was it Pete Carroll? To this day, I still don't know. But eventually we let Tom Cable go. But what we know is that with Tom Cable, John Schneider gave him the most capital out of any offensive line coach compared to any other team. He got the most first round picks. He got the most draft capital. He inherited the best picks. My video appears to be choppy. That's bizarre. There's no reason for that. I make one change to the video, now I have an excellent connection. Look at that. Preparing for any type of errors we might receive. I'm pretty sure I know what it was. Anyways, one of the biggest mistakes Tom Cable is known, John Schneider is known for, is taking Max Unger and trading him away for a receiving tight end. Was that a John Schneider thing or was that a Pete Carroll thing? Pete Carroll was big on playing outside, right? So maybe it was both of them. Was it a Tom Cable thing? He always believed that he could coach up players on the interior, in the trenches. So it was probably a failure as an organization. And it tanked our 2015 season, but we managed to overcome it. It tanked our 2016 season because we could not protect the quarterback and ultimately led to our defense falling apart because they were playing 90 snaps a game. Our 2017 season, it was the same thing and it just kept getting worse. 2018 season, pretty sure that was the year Tom Cable was gone. We brought in Brian Schottenham and we bring in Mike Solari. Mike Solari comes in. Immediately, the offensive line improves. Now, it's not great. We went from 32nd to offensive line play to like 28th, 25th. But it looked like instead of I'm out there, people are blowing by me, I'm falling on the ground because I'm trying to chop block somebody, I'm missing or bouncing straight off of them. 2, there's communication out there. People are actually reaching for their blocks and staying in position. They're just being outmatched. Part of that is Mike Solari inherited a bunch of bad players, a bunch of free agents. Some just let go players from Houston. Just some random box of scraps thrown together. A first round pick in Jermaine Ifedi who still does not know how to move his feet well. Because he's not taught how to move his feet in college. That wasn't why he was drafted. And then at the NFL level, he's still chopping. You can still see, like physically, he's spending more time trying to make sure he moves his feet than just playing the game. Interestingly enough, he and James Carpenter both went to the Jets. We have George Fant on the team now. He was a project. He was a basketball player who goes at tight end that we then converted to a tackle. We had to wait a season where he was undersized at tackle for him to eventually get up to size the next year, and then we let him go. Trade for Dwayne Brown, who even Dwayne Brown was like, what the hell is going on in the Seahawks locker room? Why can't we get a TJ Lang? It's probably because there is something wrong with the philosophy in the front office. You go there for a workout, you check out the gym, but your agent ultimately gives you advice on whether or not you should go to a team. It's not just, hey, they got a cool lake, but I don't want to have to move my family all the way to the Pacific Northwest and be taxed such and such, because players all the time decide to sign with the Jets or the Giants, or they go to Boston for some reason. I'm going to move to Vegas. I'm going to sign with the Jaguars because they overpay. You have Connor Williams, who goes to Seattle. Now, it might be because he knows that he has a bad knee and we're willing to pick up that money. And he was just desperate enough to do it. But more likely, it's because Pete Carroll was gone and he wanted to be in a new regime. But we just skipped over Andy Dickerson. He came in with Shane Waldron, and he had a ton of experience with Jeff Fisher and Sean McVay. And when he came in, the offensive line did not look that much better. It looked okay, but what was the rank? Like 25th, 28th. What talent was he given? Charles Cross, Abe Lucas. And that was like one of his last seasons as an offensive line coach. The following year, they both get hurt. But what players did he develop? I mean, he got Damian Lewis. So there's 3 good players. You want to know where those 3 good players came from? Steve Hutchinson, not John Schneider. See, when Jody Allen became the head owner of the Seahawks had been playing so bad on the offensive line and on the team as a whole that the power structure in the organization changed. One of the major changes was Pete Carroll had less control over organizational and player management. John Schneider got to make more choices in drafting, and one of the people that he brought in was Steve Hutchinson. So when we drafted Charles Cross, it's a Steve Hutchinson guy. Damian Lewis, a Steve Hutchinson guy. Big Steve Hutchinson guy, actually. That's why I tooted my horn for Damian Lewis all these years. I think Oluwatimi was a Steve Hutchinson guy. There's one other, I'm not so sure about, Abe Lucas. So don't quote me on Abe Lucas, but let's just throw him in the mix. Big thing about Abe Lucas, of course, is that he's always had a degenerative knee condition. But immediately, you get a different voice in the locker room in Steve Hutchinson. But that has nothing to do with Andy Dickerson. That was just straight up scouting. Damian Lewis, he didn't start improving because of Andy Dickerson. He and Ethan Posick went to O-line Masterminds, which is run by the likes of Lane Johnson and Duke Mayweather. I think it's Mayweather. Mayweather? That weather. Whether or not that is his last name or not, it is a big group of offensive line coach, like the tight end academy set by George Kittle, to make players better, to make players smarter, because they're not being coached by their coaches in the NFL. It's been a notorious problem that offensive linemen are not learning how to be offensive linemen at the NFL level or the collegiate level. So Tom Cable is right to a point, but he's the problem. He's not coaching players how to be good offensive linemen either. Damian Lewis, of course, being not just a top left guard, but also when you compare all of the right guards in the NFL, he last year was a top 5 guard overall, at least top 10 overall, but by my metric. With my frames. There, now it says it's working. I almost went, there's something weird going on with my OBS. It keeps wanting to kick me off YouTube. I'm gonna have to explore that later. My point being, John Schneider, he doesn't want to pay talent. He does not attract talent to the team. And whenever there is talent that is developing on its own, because Ethan Posick, when he went to the Browns, he became a top 10, 15 center in the league. That indicates that there is a problem with the evaluation of offensive line coaches that are being brought in. So when Pete Carroll had the reins taken away from him, and suddenly Shane Waldron and Andy Dickerson is brought in, and nothing changed, and now we have Greg Hubb and Scott Huff, and granted this is their first year, and neither of them were a part of the player evaluation in the draft, right? So I'm not going after Michael Jarrell, right? I don't care if he plays well or not when it comes to this conversation. But if a good offensive line coach like Ryan Van Pelt, who made the Browns offensive line day one, he's the guy who made Ethan Posick go from being one of the worst offensive linemen in the league on the Seahawks, literally one of the worst, to suddenly a top 15 center day one with the Browns. He leaves the Patriots after this last season, the Browns after the season, and goes to the Patriots. And then the Browns offensive line is now falling apart. That's coaching, not just talent. Which means how many years has John Schneider evaluated players correctly, but our coaches failed? And that's how many times has Pete Carroll or John Schneider shook the hand of an offensive line coach who was really good and decided to hire somebody else for whatever reason? Hey, we could have had Alex Gibbs. Damn it. Well, he recommends Tom Cable, who's the next best thing, but then you overlook somebody else who could have been better because, we missed out on Alex Gibbs. How many times have you brought in a Shane Waldron? Well, Andy Dickerson was my buddy because I worked with him. It's a missed opportunity after missed opportunity. You bring in Ryan Grubb, who's a good coach from college, and then Scott Huff, who did not prove to have a good offensive line in college. Is he going to coach up these players to be NFL ready? Or is he just going to run a system? What is the point of running a system if you're not going to coach the players to be good? You could have Walter Jones out there, but if the offensive line coach is bad, he's not going to be game day ready. Now, granted, Walter Jones got himself ready, but there's only so much you can do if the guys next to you aren't prepared. You might get your timing wrong. You might have a miscommunication and get beat by the cat. Eric Gilbertson in the chat. Quote, Camden, glad to catch you live. Our O-line is pretty rough. It is rough. And what's a shame is that we probably got a lot of talent on the offensive line right now. And it's really hard to tell. Stone Forsyth, one of the big things about when we drafted him is he was a raw talent. And he was probably wasted as a developmental project. I wasn't in the training room, right? He could have just failed on his own. But what coaches did he have? He had Andy Dickerson, and then he had Mike Solari, who was let go, even though Mike Solari was showing to improve the line, for Andy Dickerson. They just parted ways for reasons. I really want an upgrade of an offensive line. I want us to bring in that dude. If we're going to bring in a Leslie Frazier, if we're going to bring in a Kirk Olivadotti, if we're going to bring in an Aiden Durd, a Brendan Nugent, if we're going to bring in a Palomalu, a running backs coach, bring in somebody like that for the offensive line. Bring in that dog. Because for the last decade, our offensive line has been dog shit. And it's going to cost John Schneider his job. It doesn't matter how good your quarterback is or your wide receiver or your running back. Kenneth Walker, of course, out tomorrow, by the way. He's got some illness, maybe COVID, who knows. Yeah, it doesn't matter how good Russell Wilson is with that pretty moon ball if he's got a bunch of people up in his face. And I am tired of seeing bad defenses look good against us. And then good defenses or great defenses look like Hall of Famers against us. Scott Huff, according to Eric Gilbertson, Huff did a good job at UW, or was it just masked by dominant athletes? I was told it was, so I didn't watch a lot of the Huskies. I was told it was masked by dominant play calling and dominant scouting, but that the actual offensive line play itself was super basic, and so that when they would go up against a good pass rushing unit, the offensive line would get beat and Michael Penix would make things happen, a la, a Johnny Manziel escaping pressure, a Tim Tebow escaping pressure, Russell Wilson escaping pressure, and it would less be they're a dominant unit holding people off, which is what I want to see. I want to see a quarterback being able to complete their 7-step drop without people in their face every time. You are going to get beat every time. You're not going to get beat every time. The way that I heard it from an offensive line coach once is if you have 5 players and you throw the ball, you throw the ball 30 times, how many mistakes is a player allowed to make for that game? You got an idea? If each player makes a mistake, that's 5 plays that are thrown away. So if you throw the ball 30 times, you only have 25 plays where you have to rely then on the wide receiver or the quarterback or whatever not making a mistake. You have to rely then on the defense not making a play. So if you have one player in particular like Stone Forsyth making 15 mistakes in a game, then you're hosed. So you need to have the entire unit as a whole not making mistakes. And you only really want to have the entire unit as a whole making just like 5 mistakes, right? But if you have players left and right leaking out mistakes all over the place, then you're in trouble. You can get away with more in college because there's always a weak link in the chain, whereas in NFL, even on our team, we have a Jonathan Hankins who's a damn good defensive lineman. Eric Gilbertson. The UW O-line did win with Joe Moore Did win the Joe Moore Award, though, in 2023. So there must have been something going right. I think it was the talent. There was that offensive lineman who was drafted in the first round. Guard, I think he went to the Chargers. So, but I'm not sure if that was Scott Huff in particular. You might also tell that I'm biased in that I have a thing against college coaches. When they go to the NFL, they need to prove it to me. So we'll see. Who knows, right? Scott Huff could be the next Mike McDonald, where when he went to the Ravens, it took like 6 or 7 weeks for him to become that big, dominant defensive guru in Baltimore. So maybe Scott Huff will prove me wrong. And here's what I want against Atlanta before I end the show. I want him to prove me wrong, because for the last decade, the Seahawks have gone up against bad defenses and made them look great. Now, Geno Smith has looked amazing, but he's throwing the ball like 50 times a game and getting about 300 yards, which is not good. Zach Charbonnet has a chance to really run it down this Atlanta team's throats. Michael Jarrell has a chance to win this job at right tackle. And with the coaching on the practice squad, the player coaching with Jason Peters, I would really like for us to just put it all together. Fun fact, the Seahawks finally had a padded practice for the first time since the Lions game this past week. When you play 3 games in 10 days, things fall apart. So maybe they finally got some teaching tape. They were able to correct some things that they weren't able to correct. I want to see our offensive line in particular. Defense is a whole nother story. Our offensive line needs to get better. And it needs to for the first time in about a decade. Otherwise, you can kiss this season goodbye. That's all I have. Please like the video, subscribe to First Kick Seahawks. I'm continuing to make changes to the channel and how things run. I appreciate you all for being here. See you tomorrow.